After accomplishing their goal and receiving the Lord Vessel, the player returns to Firelink Shrine and speaks to Frampt.
Heavens, you have done it. You have retrieved the Lord Vessel. After 1,000 years, it is you. It is really you. Forgive me. I really should calm down. Now, let us take that vessel on a journey. I assume that you are ready. Now, be still. This is the Firelink Chamber for the successor of Lord Gwyn. Now, place the Lord Vessel on the altar.
The player is now ready to kill the 4 great beings in possession of the Lord Souls as an offering to the Firelink altar. This acts as the end game. You know your objective, and so that's all really there is left to do. The 4 big bosses can be killed in any order, but now is as good time as ever to take a trip to Darkroot Garden to kill some of the local wildlife. As the 4 kings reside in the depths of the Abyss, the player needs a special ring to gain access to them. Luckily, Artorias the Abyss Walker was in possession of such an item, and it now lies with him at his gravesite. When the player reaches the grave of Artorias, it's clear that he was a very respected and honored individual. His faithful wolf, Sif, still stands guard to his long-dead master's resting place, maybe out of devotion, or maybe as a deterrent for adventurers who wish to tread the Abyss. As Artorias was eventually corrupted by the Abyss, maybe the Great Wolf wishes to help others avoid the same fate. Either way, the wolf is defeated.
Yeah, Rip.
And the Covenant of Artorias is acquired. With this item, the player now ventures below into the flooded kingdom of New Londo. The kingdom was intentionally flooded by the 3 sealers to stop the spreading of the Abyss, but killed everyone in the process. Dripping with creepy atmosphere, New Londo is haunted by the vengeful spirits of those who died in the flood. The player meets one of the sages, Ingward.
Well, this is a surprise. I get few visitors, save for ghosts. You have the Lord Vessel. Very impressive. I know exactly what your intentions are. You seek the 4 kings whom I guard over. This is the key to the seal. The 4 kings slumber in the deepest chamber of the ruins. Use this key to break the seal and open the floodgates. Oh, and do not forget, the dark wraiths reside in a dark void called the Abyss. But the Abyss is no place for ordinary mortals.
The player lets out the water of New Londo and makes their way to the entrance of the Abyss, where the 4 kings reside. With the 4 kings defeated, the player receives a bequeathed soul shard, which isn't a Lord Soul, but is still enough to satiate the Lord Vessel. Next up is the Duke's Archives, home of Seath the Scaleless Dragon, who, in jealousy of his brother's immortality, went insane trying to find the secret to it. He's also in the habit of kidnapping maidens for his cruel experiments. The archives are massive, filled with enormous bookshelves which require several flights of stairs just to reach the top of. The products of Seath's experimentation stock the premises. The player reaches Seath's lair at the top and realizes that Seath is currently immortal. The player is killed and taken to a prison filled with others who share the same fate. The player breaks out and searches for a solution to Seath's imperviousness. This search takes them to the Crystal Cave, where the player finds the source of Seath's immortality. Seath knows of this and intercepts the player, who then manages to defeat him, netting him another bequeathed soul shard for the altar. Next, the player ventures deep into the catacombs in search of Nito, the first of the dead. The catacombs are filled with reanimated skeletons and necromancers. The player descends further and further into the tomb of the poor souls who were enslaved by the necromancers, and finally enters the tomb where Pinwheel searches for an answer to his twisted form.
Stronger than before. Don't lose your way. You might be hard to be as the one. Don't be afraid, my sweetheart. This is
The player kills him and goes even further into the Tomb of the Giants, which no light can pierce. The player searches for the Tomb of Nito and eventually finds it. Nito gives off the impression that he just wants to be left alone. His cutscene where he climbs out of his coffin plays every time the player returns to fight him, as if he goes back into his coffin for 5 more minutes of sleep every time he kills you. The catacombs themselves are quite lonely and barren, as well as really dark. Really dark. After Nito is defeated, the player receives a Lord Soul discovered by Nito at the inception of time itself. Finally, the player must venture into the Demon Ruins, a place which no man ought to enter, and not just because of how badly designed it is. Seriously though, what with its copy and pasted enemies, flat design, and uninspired visuals, the Demon Ruins are a place to be reckoned with. It's obvious the development team was stressed for time and resources and had to finish this area quickly.
Why? Why? After all this searching, I still cannot find it.
What a shame.
This is especially apparent with the area's main boss, the Bed of Chaos. It isn't so much a fight as it is a crappy platforming section with dodgy hit detection. This is undisputably the absolute worst part of the game, and the Bed of Chaos is the cherry on top. The bed itself is what remains of the Witch of Izalith, who tried to recreate the First Flame to avoid an Age of Darkness, but failed horribly. When the player as Hippity hopped to the center of the bed and killed the creature that lies within, they are granted the final Lord Soul needed to face Gwyn. The player returns to the Firelink altar and gives the souls as an offering, opening the great stone door that leads to the kiln of the First Flame, the place where Gwyn now resides. The player sees the solemn landscape that is the kiln and marches towards the great shrine in the center. When the player enters the final arena, they would expect a bombastic final boss, which a game like Dark Souls would surely have, but is instead greeted by the hollowed form of Gwyn, now stripped of most of his power. A sad and empty-sounding song plays in the background, and the player now uses all of their skills acquired up to this point to put the old Lord of Cinder out of his misery. The player is now faced with a choice: to link the First Flame as Gwyn did to extend the Age of Fire, or to leave the flame to fade, ushering in an age of humanity, free from the tyranny of giants. Whatever the player chooses doesn't matter much. There is no good or bad ending, but instead an equal feeling of emptiness. The player has just beaten one of the hardest and most satisfying games ever made, and yet, something is still missing. The world was not saved, only changed. The inevitable death of it all is still lingering in the air. The player should be feeling ultimate triumph as they beat the challenge of a lifetime, but instead, the ending feels hollow. The beautiful thing about Dark Souls is that you can understand what it's all about regardless of how well you understood the story. Dark Souls, despite being filled with death, is all about life. It's not about how many times you die, but about how many times you die and keep trying anyway. Dark Souls is truly a masterpiece in game design, the game of a generation, one that should be remembered for as long as video games exist. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Dark Souls. My name is Jabik, and may we meet again.